Hello, good afternoon and good evening to all. I would like to welcome you to this webinar, JMeter as your performance discovery tool, and would like to begin with an introduction of myself. I'm Shailesh Khanapur, a QA professional with 18 plus years of experience in QA and testing. I'm a QA architect here at Indium Software. I'm responsible to provide effective solutions to our customers for their performance and functional testing requirements and needs. I have worked extensively and experienced in using performance testing tools like Load Runner, Silk Performer, JMeter, QA Load, and also have used diagnostic and monitoring tools like HP SiteScope, HP Diagnostics, and Dynatrace, to name a few. I've got good experience in designing performance test strategies, workload models, and I've implemented large performance testing programs and engagements for customers in different domains. So this being a brief introduction about myself, I would now like to get into the webinar, excited about sharing some thoughts about JMeter. So without wasting much of the time, I wanted to share the agenda which we have planned for this webinar. In the next 35 minutes, I'm going to speak about the need for performance testing, various performance testing tools available in the market, and also give an overview about these tools. We would also see why JMeter as a performance testing tool, its advantages, and the evolving versions of JMeter in the recent past, and what are the new features that are available in the latest version 3.0. I will also show the usage of JMeter by demonstrating the usage of this tool for recording a business workflow and the process of creation of a script and execution. I would also like to delve on some of the challenges that JMeter has and how is that we can deal them and suggest some workaround for these challenges. We have planned to spend the last 10 minutes to answer any questions, queries that might arise during the presentation. I will also be sharing my email address so that you can shoot your questions and queries, which I can reply. So before we begin, I wanted to share some important aspects of why performance testing and why it is important. With an ever-growing and changing market of applications and technology, user expectations are at all-time high right now. Applications are required to perform at very fast speed with high quality for the users to keep using those applications. Today, with the advancement of technology, majority of users use their phones or tablets or web to purchase something online. If we talk about the retail industry, the demographic for retail shopping is quite large, with an age group of anywhere between 18 to 54. The users are more concerned with the load time. Every second counts. The longer a page takes to load, the more likely the users will leave the page. This leads to a loss of sales opportunity and higher abandoned cart percentages. I wanted to share some data on how the performance testing of an e-commerce application affects the shopper's behavior, which is fascinating to note and also be aware of. 47% of consumers expect a web page to load in 2 seconds or less. 40% abandon websites that take more than 3 seconds to load. 79% of shoppers who are dissatisfied with website performance are less likely to come back to the same site again. 44% of online shoppers will tell their friends and family about a bad experience. So page loading time is obviously an important part of any website's user experience. So how do we measure this and keep our website and applications optimal? Now it becomes more obvious that it is not enough to just build applications and put it out there, but regular testing of the user expectations mentioned a while back will not only help to create better quality applications, but will also help to retain long-term happy customers. So as we are talking about performance testing, there is also a need to use right and apt tool so that we can leverage the tools to meet the performance testing objectives and requirements. Having understood the importance of performance and the need for an appropriate performance testing tool, I will now be talking about some of the performance tools and put forth some features of these tools without much of a deep dive into them. So let me start with the market leader in the space, LoadRunner. LoadRunner is a commercial product by HP falling in the category of most expensive performance testing tools. HP LoadRunner license cost varies depending on required virtual users, protocols, and perpetual licenses. Reports claim that as much as 54% of market share in performance testing tool market is owned by HP LoadRunner. And there's a reason for it. The tool supports a large set of protocols which no vendor has been able to replicate so far. The graphs and the reports produced by LoadRunner can be understood easily and helps in easy analysis and bottleneck identification. Despite its high cost, it's still a preferable choice for enterprise testing teams because of its advanced features and dedicated support. Let's talk about another commercial tool, Visual Studio Team System, which is from the stable of Microsoft. It's a part of a suite of testing tools for web applications and is a part of Visual Studio. It's a typical Microsoft software. If you're testing these applications which has Microsoft technology stack, then it can be a good option. It has different pricing options wherein the pricing is per virtual user minute. It is a measure of how long the test is and how many users the test simulates. It can be used for testing web applications and APIs. Let us talk about another tool, Silk Performer. It is another performance testing tool which can be used for a wide spectrum of applications across web, mobile, and enterprise applications. This product is from Micro Focus, which has been taken over by HP recently, as most of you would be aware of. Silk Performer supports major web environments like Adobe's Flash and Flex, Microsoft Silverlight, HTML, and Ajax. Having spoken about commercial tools, I will now divert your attention to some of the open source tools too. To begin with, Gatling. Gatling is a free and open source tool primarily developed and maintained by Stefan Lander. Gatling has a basic GUI that's limited to test recorder only. Some of the key features of Gatling include support to HTTPS protocols and can also be used for JDBC and Java messaging service. We can design data-driven tests and has support for Windows and Linux operating system. Let's talk about another tool, Sun. Sun is a non-Java based open source performance testing tool. It's a performance testing solution that supports modern protocols like web, sockets, authentication systems, and databases. It has support only for Linux and Unix operating system, which is a constraint and ties down the hands of the performance testing team. But it also has a brighter side to it and supports a variety of protocols like WebDAV, Postgres, MySQL, and LDAV. So let's talk about JMeter now. JMeter is an open source Java-based performance testing tool which is developed and maintained by Apache. It's an open source and available free of cost. Many software teams prefer to use it for its cost effectiveness and has good platform compatibility. With it being compatible with Windows, Mac, and all Unix-based systems, and has got good support for protocols like HTTP, SOAP, FTP, and others. The first version was released in 1998, and since then there has been many upgrades to it consistently. The flip side is the reports generated, though, are very limited, but we can use external plugins and tools for more detailed reporting. One more aspect which we need to consider is the available resources. JMeter has one of the largest online community, and we can share helpful information through different forums and software testing blogs. So these are some of the reasons JMeter can be considered a great option for performance and load testing. As mentioned earlier, that JMeter has been constantly undergoing upgrades and updates based on the feedback, the current version being 3.0. I wanted to touch upon some of the features that have been worked upon to increase the maturity of this tool based on the feedback from the software community. In the current version, we can view 3 percentile levels, and there is an improvement in the performance and reliability of distributed testing and connection times. The previous versions, there were updates to SMTP sampler, wherein the options for the connection timeout and read timeouts have been added to the SMTP sampler. There was also an addition of synchronizing timer to define the maximum waiting time for a group of virtual users when executing the test. There was also an improvement on HTTPS recording with many bug fixes around this feature. There is also support to load test MongoDB using new MongoDB source config. So, having spoken about why JMeter, let us also have a look at what's in store in the latest version of JMeter 3.0. There are a lot of changes to the existing features, and new features have been added to the current version 3.0. I would like to talk about some of them. The current version provides the facility to view the elapsed time of a current test. A new advanced tab has been added to the HTTP request to simplify configuration. This also helps in better keep alive and stale connection handling. With the addition of this tab, we can now configure source address, which is like an IP spoofing like feature. There is also an improvement in the reporting feature to generate dynamic graphs in HTML pages. A dynamic HTML report can now be generated either at the end of the load test or from a result file whenever we want. This report provides the application performance index table that computes the application performance index based on configurable values for tolerated and satisfied thresholds. There is also a request summary graph which shows passed and failed percentages. There is an improved debugging features that are incorporated in this version 3.0, like a new search feature in the results tree to allow searching for a text or a regular expression in requests, responses, headers, and cookies, and so on. So with this feature, it gives the flexibility and eases the task of correlation of values when working on the design of the scripts. There is a new validation feature which can be used by the tester during the build phase of the scripts, debug the scripts, wherein we can run a selection of thread groups. There is also an improvement in HTTP client library. The migration to HTTP client 4.5.2 has started, but not yet completely finished. It does provide improvement in many areas in JMeter, like improved and better performance validation mechanisms for stale connections and keep live management. There is a lot of improvement in cookie handling, which helps to overcome some issues in previous JMeter versions. There is now a better support for compressed responses. This is actually a revolutionary change. While there might be some unexpected changes in the behavior, it is much better and more modern than the previous versions of JMeter. There is also a library which results in an improvement in JMeter plugins. In the previous versions, there was a library conflict with Selenium WebDriver testing. While 3.0 resolves this conflict, there is also an improvement in embedded resources download, that is background images, etc. The improvement is that in this version, more resources are detected and there are faster parallel downloads. Since the version 3.0, there is an auto save feature wherein JMeter automatically saves up to 10 backups for every saved .jmx file. When enabled, just before the JMX file gets saved and it is backed up to the JMeter's root backup subfolder. The backups are named after the saved JMX file and is assigned a version number that is automatically incremented. So we have seen what are the new features that are there in version 3.0. So as a part of this webinar, we would also want to demonstrate the use of this JMeter tool to demonstrate the capabilities that it has for performance testing of application. So what is that I'm going to demonstrate is just I want to give a brief introduction wherein we will be demonstrating of how do we identify some business critical transactions that can be gathered and used for load testing. Then apply this, the real-time business workflow, and create a script which will emulate these transactions as if a user is coming and doing the transactions. And we will use JMeter tool for this. We will then see how do we enhance the script to meet the real-time situations. I will show the process of enhancing and unit testing the script, and then do an execution, a small execution, and use the reporting features that are available in the tools. So let me get on to the demonstration of this tool. As a part of this, I'm going to use a flight application from HP to demonstrate the workflow here. So let me open JMeter for you and show you. So here, if you see that, as I already told, JMeter can be used for different platform compatibilities. Here, I'm going to use it for Windows. You also have got JMeter for Linux and Unix operating systems. So let me open JMeter. Right. So the tool is open. Now let me do some basic configurations as a prerequisite before we start the recording. So I'll create a test plan, a new test plan, which is nothing but a thread which is required for creating the number of thread or users for creation of the scripts. Let me add some prerequisite configurations to it, like HTTP cache manager, HTTP cookie manager. Right. So now let me add, since I'll be this workflow of recording a flight reservation has got different transactions and measurements. So let me add a transaction controller, which is nothing but a means of to measure each of those transactions in the workflow. So I'll add a transaction workflow here, a transaction controller which is used to record the transactions. As there would be different transactions that needs to be measured. Now I'll create some 8 transactions, which is a part of this workflow of flight reservations. So let me create some transaction workflows here. So let me rename all these transactions, because we need to understand what particular transaction this measurement belongs to. So in the interest of time, I have created some transaction naming conventions which we typically follow for our performance testing engagements. So I'm going to create name this first launch of the home page, login, which is another transactions which we will have to measure, another of checking the flights, doing finding the flights for which I want to select a destination, do a selection of the flights based on the information, make a payment for that flight, see whether the flight and the itinerary is booked, and then do a log off. So I have created the transactions that are required for me to measure the request and response for each of those flights. So let me add now a recorder wherein I can record these transactions or the request and response for each of those transactions. So let me add a HTTPS recorder here, and I will make some configuration settings to listen for the JMeter to capture these requests and response at a particular port on 8086. So let me make some change settings to the proxies here. And I'm asking the JMeter to listen on this port. Okay, so now we are all set. Let me copy the URL which we want to hit and capture these recordings. So I'm going to say that I'm going to launch this application, start the recording so that we can capture the request and response. Right. So now we have captured the launch. Let me go and capture the login, the request and the response for login. I've already created a username and a password in the interest of time, which is already registered in the site. So I'm going to say username is Indium, have the password for it, then login. Now we have got the response for login. The user is logged in. So now let me check what flights I want to select. So let me go and click flights. And I'm going to click on flights. I'm going to get flights. So I'm going to choose a destination from Denver to Frankfurt, which simulates a real-time situation. So I'm just going to say, I'm going to do a find flights, which is nothing but selecting the source and destination. I've got it. So now I'm going to get on to flight select, which is nothing but I've selected this flight from Frankfurt to destination. Now I'm going to make the payment for this transaction. So I'm going to select the payments, enter some credit card information, enter an expiry date. Now my flight is booked. I'm just going to check if I can see my itinerary. I see my itinerary. Now I'm going to log off as I'm done with my business workflow. I'm going to log off. Right. So now, if you see, since my script is recorded, I'm going to stop the recording of the script. So if you see that I've captured all the requests and responses that are required for each of those transactions, and you will be able to measure each of those transactions. So now, since we are done with our recording, let us see if we can unit test the script to ensure that we are able to simulate the same transactions. So for that, let me add a listener to it, which is nothing but the results stream. Let me see, because we have got this JMX file. I'm saving this file. So let me run this for one user and one iteration and see whether we are able to simulate the same transaction, whatever we have recorded. So I'm going to run this for one user and run it for one iteration and check it out. I'm going to execute this. So if you see that, there is we see all the things passing out. So let's see whether we are able to capture the correct requests and responses. Okay, we are able to get the response. We are able to get the data login. So if you see here, when we got the recording, we got the name of the user ID, but right now we are not getting the username and username here. So the probability is that there are some dynamic values which are getting passed on for the login, which we need to find out and pass it as a part of the response. So now let's see how is that we captured those dynamic values. So we have got an option here wherein to check what are the values. So if I see here, these are some of the request and response. And if you see here, there is a user session value that is getting passed on, which might be the reason wherein this dynamic value is not getting passed on. So let's see how do we pass this dynamic value to the request so that we get the right values. So we have got an option here of testing the regular expression tester. So since we know that this is the dynamic value we want, let's capture those. So using a left boundary for it, I'm going to capture the dynamic value and since we have a right boundary for it, let's test it. So if you see that we were able to capture the only value which we require. So now let's pass on this dynamic value wherever the request passes on to the server. So if you see here, the value gets passed on here. So how do we pass on the captured dynamic value here? For that, let me create a regular expression capture and do a regular expression extractor so that we can capture the value. So I'm going to get this value, uh, name it as C session as it's a correlated value. And since it's a session ID, I'm going to refer it with the variable name as user session. And the expression that we are going to capture is this expression. And I'm going to tell JMeter that capture the first occurrence of it wherever you see the value. So now, since we have got this value, now we have to pass this value to the request. So where is that? So if you see here, this is the where we will pass on the value. So let me pass on this value appropriately. So now the session is captured. Let's run and see whether the dynamic value gets captured and passed as a response to the request. I'm going to clear this. I'm going to run it again. Now let's see whether we are able to log in and capture the value. Right. If you see, now we have got the value that whatever the transaction we are supposed to do, we have done it. Now as we have captured this dynamic values, now let us further enhance this script by getting close to a simulation of a real-time user coming in and booking the flight. We will now parameterize some data. So what I have created some data in the interest of time, wherein we will simulate such that different users come in and log in and select different origins and different departure locations and different destination locations so that real-time simulations can be done. So how do we do that? So let me pass on the values right now. For that, I will have to create a config element for CSV data config wherein we can capture the values. So I'm going to say it as flight data, and as I have created a file, a CSV file with the usernames, I'm going to use the same. And since what are the values that I need to pass? I don't have any variable names here, so I'll pass A, B, C, D are the values which are nothing but the column names and delimited by a comma. Right? And where is that we have to pass on these values? So the login page, this is where is the username and the password. So I'm going to pass the value A to it. And for the password, I'm going to pass the value B. And for the source and the destination, I have to pass the value because we recorded the departure location as Denver for us. So now let's use variable C for it. And then for the destination, use the variable D. So now let's say if passing these values, well, we are able to get those values. So I'm going to execute this once again, see whether the values have been passed. So we had recorded with Indium, and now we are passing as if another user is coming and logging in. So let me see if we get this. So if you see here, the values of Bob has been passed, and for the reservations, it is booked. Sorry. So we will have to make changes here. The value is not passed, so it's a syntax error. Let me run this once again. Right. So if you see here, the value gets passed here for the name, username, and password, and the value for the source and the destination also gets passed as we have put in the Excel sheet. So the data is getting passed. Now let's see if we further test this, unit test this, to see whether if we test it with 5 users, do 5 users data for the 5 users get replicated in our script or not. So I'm going to run this for 5 users. I made the necessary changes. Now it's getting executed. So if you see for login, you see Bob, you see Lucy, you see Karen, and Tony. So if you see that whatever data we were trying to pass has been passed here. So now we have got the script which has been enhanced, which has takes different sets of data which can be passed. So now let's see how do we execute this. We have completed the unit testing of our script for a business workflow which emulates the transaction of a flight reservation with different sets of data. Now let me get into the next step of executing or showing how do we execute this for a load test. So let me add some listeners which are required for executing this. So I'll add some basic listeners right now. First, let me add the aggregate report. Let me add some basic listeners like active threads, which are nothing but active users. Add listeners related to uh, response time distribution, response times over time, response percentile, response versus threads, some important like transactions throughput versus thread, and transactions per second. So we have added some basic listeners which can be used for aggregate. So how do we use this? So if you say the aggregate report, which I was mentioning earlier, in 3.0 gives you the information about the 90th percentile, 95th percentile, and 99th percentile. So this is where we get these. And I was mentioning that there has been some good reports and plugins which we are trying to use here. So let me execute this for as a load test and show you the demonstration of execution of a JMeter script using a different set of load. So let me go here and increase this to 10 seconds and loop it for 10 iterations so that we get some data points of when we execute the test. Go here, I will clean everything. This now, let me execute this test. So if you see here, I'm going to execute this test for 10 users, 10 iterations. So if you see here, you can see that the users are logged in, are doing the transactions, and you can see that there are 10 users that are logged in. There are transactions that are being generated, transaction response times, and how many transactions are happening per second. So on an average, if you see here, there are around 7 transactions that are happening per second, and various transactions have been measured over time. And this is the response time in milliseconds for each of those transactions which we are measuring, right from logging in to log off, doing various transactions. So here you see that there are different transactions as a part of this workflow, and each user is iterating these transactions for 10 times, which we have scheduled it. So 10 users, 10 iterations, so each transaction is happening 10. So you have got 80, 800 as a matter of fact, data points for your sampling. So if you see here, JMeter gives us the flexibility of scheduling these transactions. Now you can have number of iterations. If you want, you can schedule it to run for a particular period, or you can have it for say an hour test or a 5 hours test, or based on the need and the requirement. So this is what is the demonstrations with respect to JMeter. Now let me get on to some of the challenges that this tool has. There are a lot of challenges in this world, and JMeter is also a product which has got some challenges. I would now like to talk about some challenges that exist, but also will delve upon the effects and the probable work around or the solutions for these problems. So there is a challenge when we run JMeter console in view mode, which does create an issue with high CPU and memory utilization. This is caused due to memory consuming listeners and other graphical reporting listeners when we execute a performance test. So based on our experience, when we were executing for one of our large retail customers, wherein we were executing 1,000 user tests for their e-commerce application, we observed that the reporting listeners like active threads, response over time, and threads over time consumed more memory. The issue that we got into was that the console was getting frozen without any prior alert. So we adopted a workaround for this challenge, or a solution. We executed the test by not using GUI console. So here I would like to suggest that to overcome this issue of CPU and memory utilization, we use optimum graphical listeners and also run the test by not using the GUI console. The other challenge of using JMeter's distributed architecture, the master engine can often dump its score or produce out of memory exception. The cause of this could be due to high number of threads, and it could stop generating the expected traffic. In one of our performance testing engagements, we found that we received high CPU and memory usage, and JMeter instance was getting hung when executing a 2,500 user test. We were using 3 JMeter engines, 1 master and 2 slave configurations. Based on an analysis, we've noted that the JMeter client machines, the heap size was not configured properly, and later we changed the heap size on the client's RAM machine, based on the RAM size, and we solved the issue. The workaround solved the issue. So during performance testing using JMeter, we also stumble upon technical challenges of the scripts not getting recorded, or not used. So JMeter by default will record HTTP based applications. So but sometimes we receive a certificate error while recording HTTP based application. So the workaround is that we need to add JMeter certificate directly to the browser's list of trusted certificates. We also encounter sometimes a simulation wherein we record a particular transaction and obtain the response time for this transaction. For example, there could be certain AJAX-based backend processes which JMeter would not record. In such cases, we will have to work closely with developers or development team and should configure JMeter to ensure the record. So as we have seen that the success of performance tests not only depends on how effectively the tests are carried out, but also on the effectiveness of the report it generates. JMeter offers several possibilities for reporting with default versions and more addition of reporting with JMeter plugins. It supports a lot of protocols which can be customized and supports through plugins like HTTPS, LDAP, JDBC, JMS, SMTP, POP, etc. We also seen that JMeter provides facility for cross-platform compatibility and also provides an extension through Bean shell scripting or can be integrated with JavaScript, Groovy, Java. So it also provides some reporting flexibility wherein it provides aggregate report graphs, which we have seen gives you information of 90, 95, and 99 percentiles. It gives you statistical data related to average, min, max, median. It gives you graphs like hits per second, which displays the hits generated by the user over the server, gives you response time over graph, which gives you in milliseconds for each of those samplers we have configured. And it also gives information about active users or threads. It also provides information for collecting the server metrics of different servers and server metrics like CPU, memory, network, and disk statistics. I also wanted to show some of the reports that we have generated for some of our customers for their performance testing engagements and wanted to show some customized reports we created to meet the objectives and the bottlenecks we identified. The reports we customized to show the test execution are sometimes like a test execution report on the ramp up and the active sessions that get created during the execution of a test, an average response time graph, and to correlate the different performance data parameters to analyze the data. We can also customize the CPU usage, raw data, and memory, and use this information to conclude if there is any hardware issue or memory leakage in the application. This is another customized information wherein we created a network bandwidth test conducted as a part of one of our engagements for one of our customers. There is another report that is created for a SOAP test and wherein we gather the server metrics at different intervals of the test to see the behavior of the system with varying user loads. So these are some of the graphs that or the information that we generated or the report statistics to give information about the application architecture, about the system, and various other components of the application in performance testing. So now I would take some questions and would be happy to answer some queries if anybody has any. Okay. I've got one question which says, is it possible to generate graph for response time? Yes, we have seen that there are listeners available for the JMeter plugin, and we have got a listeners for a response time graph, which can be selected and executed automatically to create the response time. And this report or the graph can be exported as a CSV, or we can save the graphs as a PNG format and use it whenever we require. Another question. Yes, I've got another question. The question is about, can we execute different network bandwidth tests using JMeter, especially if it's a mobile-based application? The answer would be an affirmative yes. We can do a different bandwidth throttling test wherein it can be configured to throttle on different networks. In the JMeter properties file, we need to go and change the settings. We will have to do some math here to calculate how many characters per second that has to be done, and make the changes accordingly. And then we will have to ensure that we restart the JMeter after this change in properties. Okay, I've got another question which says, is there any limitation on concurrent users in JMeter? I would say no. JMeter supports unlimited users, but again, the number of users would always be dependent on the hardware configurations that are there that needs to be used when subjecting to load, and the hardware configuration typically would depend on the CPU, the RAM size. And typically, we can use a 16 core, a 64 GB RAM to use them for load tests. One more question. Uh, there is a question about what is an important feature of JMeter that gives us more flexibility. Um, yes, there are, as I said in the previous slide, I had mentioned that there is a lot of flexibility. I would say JMeter supports Bean Shell and Java and Groovy. So there is a Bean Shell interpreter which is a Java source and which can be interpreted and directly used in JMeter. So JMeter does provide us a lot of flexibility for use. Another question I've got, which says, does JMeter support only web-based applications? I would say JMeter not only supports web-based application, it also supports web services, database testing, uh, FTP, LDAP, mail, and as also mentioned, MongoDB, which can be configured. So I would, if you can shoot me your questions, I can answer. In the interest of time, now I would like to summarize that about this webinar, that there are various performance testing tools available in the market, and we have heard about JMeter as a performance testing tools, its advantages, and the versions and the features that are available in the latest version. We also have seen some of the challenges that JMeter has, and how is that we can deal with them with some suggested workarounds for these challenges, and how this tool can be used to meet the demands of performance testing and effectively use this tool. I'm pretty sure now that you are ready for your upcoming holiday season. If not, it's not too late at all. You can identify your critical performance testing bottlenecks. I wish you all success for your performance testing. Thank you.